right hand, please. You swear affirm any testimony you give the court is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I so affirm.
You'll have a seat over there, please. State your name, spell your last name, please.
My name is Richard Lassane Frierson, Frierson.
Good morning, Dr. Frierson.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Okay.
So, can you
Do you want me to tell the jury now?
Oh, yes, sir.
All right. That's part of what we were discussing. In order to get the trial ready to go, when a person asserts a defense such as been asserted here, the court can say, I would like him evaluated on the court's behalf. That has been done. This was the court's evaluator. He is an expert in the field of psychiatry. He's done an evaluation. Talked to numbers of people. He is here to help you consider testimony regarding capacity to conform, morally right from wrong, legally right from wrong, the issues y'all are tasked with. Dr. Frierson has performed an evaluation to that end for your consideration. Now, his testimony is not offered for other purposes. It's offered for that. I want you to know that they keep talking about the state's. This is the court's evaluator. And if the court is the state's the state, the defense is the defense. This is the court's expert. You may. The fact that Dr. Frierson was selected by the court, he's for y'all's consideration. I can't, as the court, comment on facts, have an opinion on facts. Y'all are to make determinations of fact. We discussed that. I make rulings, legal, evidence in, evidence out, fair and unfair, those kind of things. Your task at hand when you're finally tasked and begin discussing the case will be to make determination of fact. The court's selecting Dr. Frierson does not vouch for, give him any more credibility, less credibility. He's not my guy. He has done an evaluation for y'all's consideration. Y'all will evaluate his opinions to that end, just as you will the other opinions of the other experts. So the fact that I'm telling you he's the court's person to evaluate Mr. Jones in this case in no way impacts your decision on whether to consider his opinion better or worse. It's still up to y'all to consider the testimony he's offering because it's your job. My job is to assign him a task. I assign the task, here he is. Fair enough?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Hi. Dr. Frierson, can you tell the jury a little bit about yourself, your background, your history, where you work?
I'm a South Carolina native. I was born in Sumter, South Carolina. Finished Sumter High School in 1980. Attended the University of South Carolina. I actually have a Bachelor of Music degree that I completed in 1984. Completed my medical doctorate at USC School of Medicine here in Columbia in 1988. I then completed 4 years of residency training in general psychiatry in 1992 at William S. Hall Psychiatric Institute. I completed an additional 1-year fellowship in forensic psychiatry at Hall Institute. I am board certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology in both general psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. And currently I am a professor of psychiatry at USC School of Medicine.
Now, do you also work for the Department of Mental Health?
We have a contract with the Department of Mental Health that I provide forensic evaluations at their request.
And is that part of your salary as a clinical professor, or is it in addition to?
It's a base fee that they pay per year.
But that's on top of your clinical professor's salary. They pay you.
No, that makes up part of it.
That makes up part of your total salary.
Right.
But you do get paid for your time.
I get paid a salary yearly.
I know it's not a question, just got it.
I'm not paid by the hour.
Right. And you didn't do this work for free. It was part of your job.
Yeah, I was assigned to do this evaluation.
Now, this evaluation that you've done and the amount of information that you reviewed in this case, is it a lot? Is it a little bit? How's that go?
This is the most information I have ever had to review in a criminal case in the 30 years that I've been doing my work.
And as part of your evaluation and assessment, taking a social history.
Yes, we rely on social workers to do that usually. In this case, I think that you provided some information. I also spoke with some of his family members.
And the defense has provided you with a lot of information as well.
Yes,
Providing a social history report, social history backgrounds, from our social worker, as well as questionnaires that y'all have filled out, right?
correct.
And in order to do a full assessment of somebody and determine what may be going wrong with them, the social history is important, isn't it?
Yes.
Can you do a complete evaluation without having a complete social history?
Well, it's not going to be as good as if you have a complete social history.
Okay. Now, you've seen Mr. Jones a number of times. Do you recall how many times you met Mr. Jones?
I've interviewed Mr. Jones on 6 occasions for a total of 19 hours.
Do you have any ideas, like how many pages of records that you reviewed in this case?
Several 100,000.
Ultimately, you came to an opinion regarding criminal responsibility. Is that right?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what your opinion is as to criminal responsibility of Mr. Jones?
It's my opinion that on the dates of August 28th to 29th of 2014, Mr. Jones would have been able to distinguish legal and moral right from legal and moral wrong, and could recognize his actions as legally and morally wrong.
Now, that was your opinion based on all the evidence that you reviewed, right?
That's my opinion based on all the evidence I reviewed, my interviews with Mr. Jones, my interviews with family members, all of the evidence that I was provided.
And we've met and talked about this case a number of times, is that right?
Yes, we have.
Now, in addition to the family history, did Mr. Jones have a family history of mental illness?
Yes.
Does a family history of mental illness make somebody more likely to eventually have mental illness?
And specifically with this case or just in general?
Just in general.
Yes.
Does Mr. Jones have a history of child abuse and childhood trauma?
He has a history of growing up in a house where there was some domestic violence. So that would be considered, in my book, traumatic for him.
Does a history of childhood abuse and trauma make somebody more likely to develop mental illness later in life?
Certain mental illnesses, yes.
Does Mr. Jones have a history of adolescent marijuana use?
Yes.
Does a history of adolescent marijuana use make somebody more likely to later develop mental illness?
Yes.
Does Mr. Jones have a history of head trauma?
Yes.
Does a history of head trauma make somebody more likely to develop later in life mental illness?
It can, yes.
In your initial notes, and I'm starting to go through your report a little bit. I'm skipping ahead to sort of to page 18 after your summary of the materials that you reviewed.
Okay?
And I think in the first full paragraph, you said that you reserve the right to alter your diagnostic opinion should further information become available. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we've met and talked about Mr. Jones and your opinions about him and what you've considered. And I guess what I'm getting at is we had a conversation about Mr. Jones' symptoms and what would happen to him if he was unmedicated, right?
I don't.
Let me rephrase the question. Mr. Jones was medicated at all the times that you met him.
Yes,
He was not symptomatic at any of the times.
that's correct.
And I believe what you told me was that if he was unmedicated, became symptomatic, the symptoms were verified, that could alter your opinion.
Yes,
Um,
depending on what the symptoms were
okay.
and how they were described and how an evaluation would lead to a diagnostic finding.
Sure. A couple of other things before I get further into your report. The issue about hyper-religiosity, is that something that's common to schizophrenics?
Persons with schizophrenia can become hyper-religious, yes. Not all, but some.
And while it's your opinion that Tim Jones should or had the capacity to know the difference between legal and moral, right from wrong at the time of that, right?
At the time of the alleged offenses, yes.
Or at the time of the killings. I mean, he admits to killing.
Yes.
And he's never denied that to you.
Denied what?
That he killed his kid.
No.
But you told me, I believe what you said was he felt morally justified.
Well, in his decision-making about, are we talking about Natan or are we talking about the other four children? Because they're different.
Okay. Well, can you tell us about the differences?
Okay. He reported to me that the death of Natan was accidental, that he was exercising him to try to get him to confess to blowing an electrical outlet and maybe some other outlets in the house. And Natan would not confess. And he exercised him, he spanked him, and he sent him to his room to bed early because he wouldn't confess. And then he went back. He's told me two different versions of this. One was that he went back in and found him dead. The other was that he went back and shook him and he just collapsed. But he did not intend, in his words, to kill Natan.
Okay. And then as to the other four?
As to the other four kids, it would be helpful for me to refer to
Please do.
my notes. After Natan died, he reported that he went into a mad panic. What am I going to do? He had not had thoughts that Natan wanted to harm him until the outlet was blown. Like earlier that day, he had no fear of Natan or thought that Natan wanted to hurt him. But once he found the outlet blown and Natan wouldn't confess, the fact that Natan would not confess, in his mind, he thought Natan was hiding something. So after he died, he went into a mad panic. He said, I considered calling 911, but they'll think I did it. They're going to say I killed him. He reported telling Mira and Eli that I think he's dead. And he stated that Mira said that Natan was not breathing. He then sent Mira and Eli to watch television in the living room. And I asked him, do you think possibly you disciplined Natan too harshly? And he said, yes, but I had no intention to kill him. He then went to smoke a cigarette to calm himself down. He tried to smoke spice, he told me, and it was not working. I've interviewed him several times and gone over what happened. In September of last year, during my interview, he told me he used spice after Natan died. In March of this year, he denied using spice after Natan died and said he didn't use spice until after the death of the other 4 children. Then, according to phone extraction records, about 8:30 that night, he said Natan had already died. He did a YouTube search for a video called American History X Rape Scene. This was done at 8:30 p.m. at night. He had seen this movie previously, he told me. He reported that he watched this scene and thought, I'm going to prison and they're going to do bad things to me. The inmates will think I'm a baby killer. I asked him, do you think they would tell me more about that? And he described that because of people who molest children or people who kill children, that other inmates tend to target them. And I asked why, and I asked, do you think they would be morally outraged? And that's why, because they're not law enforcement. And he said yes. He then said he went to a convenience store about 3 minutes from his home to purchase cigarettes, that Mira went with him. Eli chose to stay home. The other 2 children had already gone to bed. He states that he purchased 10 packs of cigarettes at the convenience store and drove home. A receipt indicates that this occurred at 1:50 in the morning, although he thought his time is a little bit distorted when he describes this. He thought that was much earlier in the night than 1:50 a.m. He says that on the way home, he heard a demonic voice, which is how he described it in September, and then in March said a creepy gremlin voice that told him, kill the kids. He described the voice as being inside of his head, being very brief and not prolonged. During the September interview, he reported that he went back to the trailer and smoked. I knew I had schizophrenia. I was psychotic. I thought it was better for me to take their lives. I cut off their windpipes, kissed them, and took their life. He said, I'm not a murderer. I'd rather know where they're at. I killed all 4 where I left them. I tried to kill myself with spice. I passed out. I woke up the next morning. The paranoia kicked in. What am I going to do now? It's a matter of time before I get arrested. I might as well take a trip to Vegas.
At some point, he told you that he, in his opinion, it was better for him to send them to heaven than to live what he perceived to be their future life.
His thought processes were that, and he described it to me, Amber didn't want them. He was going to go away. He grew up without his mother. He didn't want them. He thought it would be better if they were just all together. And so he made a decision and a conscious choice to kill them. He felt, in a sense, in his way, morally justified, which is much different than not knowing it's morally wrong to do so.
Right. And that's what you told him. That he
Yes.
morally justified it. Exactly.
Right. Yes.
Right. That was his decision that he went through.
That's what he told me as to why he decided to do what he did.
And you noticed some inconsistencies in his reports over the years.
Yes.
And mentally ill people aren't always the most consistent reporters.
I think non-mentally ill people are not always the most consistent. When you're talking about something that happened 5 years ago, different times reporting it, our memories get modified over time. That's not abnormal.
You told me that he was remorseful
Yes,
and that he regrets.
yes.
You said you would not describe him as a career criminal.
I'm not sure what that means. He certainly had some legal difficulties early on, but he had a really 8-year period during his marriage to Amber where he appeared to function very well. Was stable, not using drugs, not using spies, attending church, no legal difficulties.
Was he hypersensitive to abandonment?
Yes.
And did the spice make him paranoid?
I think at the end it did. He began using spice sometime in the late spring, early summer of 2014. And he used incredible amounts of spice. He says up to 5 times a day. At work, he would go outside on breaks to use spice. He had used it that day. And if you look at his banking records, the amount of money that he's spending at this shop called Time Warp, where he bought spice, increased throughout the summer. Up until, I think, I don't want to get the exact wrong amount, but in August, he spent $230 in the month preceding the offenses. $65 on June 30th, $70 on August 4th, $35 on August 13th, $60 on August 16th.
And those are just the ones that you can trace through his banking. Right?
Through a credit card, right. I don't know if he bought extra with cash.
And you ultimately gave Tim a diagnosis.
I did.
And what was that? What was that diagnosis?
I diagnosed Mr. Judd's with a substance-induced psychotic disorder from spice, or synthetic cannabinoids, as we call it. I also diagnosed him with cannabis use disorder severe and alcohol use disorder mild.
Now, the substance-induced psychotic disorder. We talked about that in relation to these events, right?
Yes.
And
what I mean by that specifically is the thought that it's not normal it's not a delusion because it wasn't a fixed false belief, but just to have the paranoid thought that my 6-year-old child is somehow going to use an electrical outlet to kill me in my sleep. That's not a normal thought that I think most people in their right mind would think.
right, it's psychotic.
Yes. Well, I think it's paranoid, yes.
And this is a substance-induced psychosis, right? That he was in at the time of the offenses on the 20th.
Yes.
And that, but for the spice, we wouldn't be here.
I don't think so. But, I'm not a fortune teller.
Based on everything that you have here,
I think spice contributed incredibly to what happened.
I'm going to go down to page 19 on your report and talk a little bit about during you did a competency to stand trial evaluation of Mr. Jones back in 2016. Is that right?
Yes.
And during that time, he talked about the voices and told you about voices, right?
Yes.
And at that point in time, and you have a blurb here where he told you he was hearing voices every day throughout his life from the time that he was 10 on, right?
That's what he said the first time I saw him.
In 2016.
I've been hearing voices since I was 10. It's only through many more hours of evaluation that you have to ask him, describe the voices, tell me what you mean by voices. What do they say? And it became clear to me the more you talk to him about the content and how he described them, that what he is referring to as voices are not psychotic hallucinations, but they are his own anxious thoughts. I'll give you an example. He told the police officers in Mississippi that the voices started after his divorce or after the separation from Amber. I asked him about that. What did you mean by that? And he said, the voices were saying, what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of 5 kids? How am I going to be able to work and manage all of this? He said he couldn't concentrate at work because he kept having these intrusive thoughts. I think anybody who undergoes a divorce, or many people who undergo a divorce, is very stressful. And so the way he refers to his stressful, anxious thoughts is he refers to them as voices. And you ask him, does it sound like someone's in the room talking to you? No. And then later, as we've gone on, he will say to me, I know that now that these aren't hallucinations, but intrusive thoughts. And he would refer to his anxious thoughts as intrusive thoughts instead of voices.
And that was new language to you, right? That's not common language.
Well, he actually used the term, I believe he used the term thought insertion. And that is a medical term, that's a psychiatric term. I don't know how someone who's a layperson would ever know that term on their own unless somehow in the course of psychiatric interactions with other doctors, they've told him that.
And you know he's met with a lot of doctors.
I'm sorry?
You know he's met with a lot of doctors.
Yes,
It's possible that is a term that he picked up.
it's possible.
Before I leave that page, can you tell the jury what his medication regimen was at the time that you saw him? Or
Which time?
Well, what it's been throughout his time?
I could just say in general, he has been on antipsychotic medication throughout his time at the Department of Corrections. He's also been on a medicine called a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. That's a fancy word. It just means it's an antidepressant. Things like Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft, all of those are antidepressants. They treat depression and anxiety. He's been on that throughout almost all of his incarceration. More recently, at the suggestion of a defense expert, the Department of Corrections placed him on a mood stabilizer, Depakote.
How about Geodon?
He's been on Geodon. He's been on very large doses of Geodon.
How about Adderall or Propranolol?
Propranolol is a beta blocker, and it's actually just used to manage side effects from some of the antipsychotic drugs.
Is one of the side effects the akathisia?
Akathisia, yes. That's when people have a inner restlessness. Antipsychotics can make people feel like they have to move all the time.
And how about Remeron?
Remeron is an antidepressant that's frequently used to help with sleep.
And how about Prazolam?
Prazolam.
Sorry.
Early on, and this has since resolved, but very early on in his incarceration, he had reported some nightmares about what happened, his killing his children. That it would play over in his mind and he'd have some flashbacks about it. And Prazosin is a blood pressure medicine, interestingly enough, that has been used in the VA and some other places to treat these symptoms in PTSD. But those since resolved that I don't believe he's taking that anymore.
But he reported at one point in time he was having daily flashbacks multiple times a day that they lasted.
Yes, I mean, people can be traumatized by their own criminal acts or own violent acts. I'll have people who commit murder, who shoot people, and after that, they keep thinking about what they did, and they don't want to think about it, and it's intrusive and bothersome.
And at one point in time, on April the 28th of 2015, after he had been in the Department of Corrections for a year, he tried to kill himself. You tell. He tied a sheet around his neck.
He tied a sheet around his neck, and he stated at that time he was feeling both depressed and angry. He missed 2 doses of medication the night before. They had instituted a new policy there because some inmates where he was being kept in safekeeping were dousing nurses with urine and feces and stuff that no one wants to be thrown on them. And they required that the inmates go to the very back of the shower, at the back of their room. They would put the medicine on the flap, and they would back up, and the inmate, or defendant in this case, could get their medication. There was some conflict or the different versions of what exactly happened, but he said that he went into the shower, but the nurse kept telling him, you got to back up against the wall, and he didn't do that, so she wouldn't give him his medicine, and he became very angry. He stated that after that, well, he's given 2 versions of this. One was after missing that dose of medication, the voices came back. Later in November, he stated that it wasn't a voice, it was his anxious thoughts came back, okay? So he tied a bedsheet around his neck and hung it from the door in an attempt to hang himself. And the correctional officers entered and cut him down. He said to me at that time he was frustrated at the situation and just wanted to die. There's conflicting reports about this. He later told supposedly a nurse that he was not suicidal at all. He was just mad.
That nurse is no longer employed at CDC, right?
That's my understanding. And so I reviewed a video. I wanted to see this for myself. And so I asked the Department of Corrections, do you have a video of this? And they were able to provide. I went out, it lasted about an hour, and I watched this.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as defense exhibit number 300 for identification. I recognize that.
Yes, this appears to be a view from overhead in his cell looking down of him during the suicide attempt.
And is that that's a still from the video that you
It's a
watched?
still, yes. It appears so.
Your Honor, this time we offer defense exhibit number 300 and
No objection.
300's in without objection.
So, I hope they can see with the glare. This is the shower area right here. Is that right?
I believe so.
And so he said he was standing here, and they wanted him back here.
That's what he says, yes.
And this is Tim with the sheet around his neck tied to the door.
Yes,
And he's leaning forward into it.
yes.
Sorry. Now, the notes that you reviewed around the suicide attempt also, did they talk about him experiencing anything that night, the night before?
Well, I know that his treating psychiatrist, Dr. Wood, thought that from missing the side effect medicine, the propranolol, which was one of the medicines he was taking, that he might be experiencing akathisia, that inner, causes you to feel like you constantly need to keep moving. People with, on antipsychotic medications, on an inpatient unit, you might see them pacing, just constantly walking. So it's the inner feeling of restlessness. And if you look at the video, initially for the first 20 to 30 minutes, he's just sitting there shaking his leg around and round and round and round and round. And the Dr. Wood thought that maybe that was evidence of akathisia, and I think that might have been evidence of akathisia. She's probably correct.
Now, do you recall from your view of this video, like what time? So he's in a camera cell that's being monitored, right?
Yes.
Sorry. Do you recall what time he actually started trying to hang himself?
It was early in the morning, to my recollection.
If I said it was about 8:08 a.m., does that sound about right?
I didn't write the time down. I just remember it was early in the morning.
Okay.
Sounds about right. I couldn't say for sure.
Sure. And how long was he doing that before the guards came in and cut him down?
A long time.
In an hour?
He would take it off, adjust it, put it back on, do things with it. It went on for a while. The whole video's over an hour. This went on for maybe, I'm going on memory here, which isn't always, it went on for 30, 40 minutes at least.
Well, in your report on page 40, you said he was spent almost an hour attempting to do so.
Okay, well then maybe it was an hour, I'm sorry. It was a long time. He never, one of the things that I do, I have a contract with the Department of Corrections that I review completed suicides. I look at all the suicides in the Department of Corrections and review the incident reports of how they happen. And most of them that I've reviewed happened very quickly. They happen within minutes. There's a check, they're okay. There's another 15-minute check, they're hanging. So he is never seen picking his feet up, to get leverage on the ligature point. He's leaning forward, but he never lifts his feet off the ground. And I think there's evidence of some ambivalence on his part.
And you can take your
Which anybody who commits suicide has some degree of ambivalence.
Can you take your weight, put it on your neck without picking your feet up off the ground?
You can, but it's much more effective to let gravity do it. Okay. And easier to let gravity do it.
I believe at one point in time, in this, I'm going over to page 21, top of page 21, where he had told you that this was his first suicide attempt at one point in time.
He said, well, right, he denied previous suicide attempts, which was, he said he never tried to kill himself before.
And then he told you he had on one other occasion.
Well, he tried to kill himself with spies
Right.
after the murder of the 5 children.
He told you that was an overdose of medication, right?
Yeah, but he told me spies.
Okay.
He specifically said, I tried to kill myself with spice, but it didn't work.
So is it your word that you said that medication, overdose on medication?
Well, he said both, I think. And I said, what spice, but he,
For spices is as medication.
yes,
You said he was using it medicinally.
yes.
Um,
Or implied that it had some benefits for him.
Going down a little bit down the page where you talked about his psychiatric history, can you tell the gentleman jury about his evaluation when he was in the Navy?
Right. According to military records, he first was evaluated by a mental health professional or by a psychiatrist, I think, in 2000. Let me take that back. He was sent to a drug counseling program as an adolescent, but his first real encounter with mental health professionals was in 2000 when he was in the Navy. He had gone in the Navy wanting to be a Navy SEAL. He had been in a car accident that damaged or caused him hip pain, and during basic training, he was having horrible hip pain, and he realized he would never be able to complete this and become a Navy SEAL. He thought about being a diesel mechanic, but the pain was too hard. And he had told them, and this is what he denies to me, and no one seems to have any recollection of this. His records from the military says that he informed staff he had suicidal thoughts since the age of 14 and engaged in self-mutilation, which involved cutting himself with a knife and paper clip. He denies ever doing that, ever saying that. I don't know what to make of that. His family has no history of knowing him doing stuff like that. But anyway, they gave him a diagnosis of depression not otherwise specified, or depressive disorder not otherwise specified, alcohol dependence, cannabis dependence, and gave him what's called an entry-level separation and deemed ineligible for re-entry into the military.
Let me show you what's been marked as FITS exhibit number 299. How do you recognize that?
This is a military document from the Department of the Navy from a commanding officer of the Recruit Training Command to Personnel Support Activity Detachment, the officer in charge regarding his separation.
Okay. And they note his diagnosis of a depressive disorder and alcohol and cannabis.
Evidence by a depressive disorder and medical evaluation of alcohol dependence and cannabis dependence.
Okay. Now, we'd offer FITS exhibit number 299. No objection?
99's in, no objection.
Now, you have previously testified that it's not uncommon for mental illness to begin as a diagnosis of depressive disorder in early teens, late teens, early 20s. Is that right?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Is it uncommon for mental illness to begin as a depressive disorder?
What mental illness are we referring to?
Any-
Depressive disorder is a mental illness.
Okay.
That's why I'm sort of confused by the question.
Sure. Is a depressive disorder in late teens, early 20s, is that something that could lead to a major mental illness later on?
Could that be the first signs? Is that what you're asking me? Yes.
Thank you. One more thing before I go back to page 21. When talking about his suicide attempt, or what he did at the prison, what was his opinion regarding future self-harm?
That he would never kill himself
And
for religious reasons.
is that because he hoped reuniting with his children?
Well, it's a sin in his book to commit suicide.
So he wouldn't be reuniting with his children that he had sent to heaven?
Yes.
Going forward in time in his psychiatric history a little bit and over to page 22, after he separated from Amber, he started seeing a therapist, right?
Yes.
And there was something that was described as the monster. Can you tell the jury what you said about that?
Let me find it in my report.
It's the third paragraph, and I guess I would start with, he was bombarded with anxious thoughts.
Yeah. In discussing the separation from Amber and in treatment with Miss Hames, he reported that he need something to calm his intrusive thoughts. He could not think about anything else other than the loss of his marriage, and that he worried about it incessantly. I was bombarded by anxious thoughts. He lost almost all ability to concentrate at work. So he reached out to his boss, and they referred him to the Employee Assistance Program, or EAP, which in turn referred him to Ms. Haynes. He states that he had the fear that Amber was having an affair, and that is the monster in his mind, that he keeps thinking she's cheating on me.
Did you ever talk to Dr. Haynes?
No, I reviewed her records.
And the jury can remember what she said. Skipping forward a little bit, you went through his treatment records on page 23 and 24. You went through his treatment at the Department of Corrections, right?
Right, I, in my report, organized it by year for the sake of breaking it up somehow.
Now, in the 2016, 2017, 2018 history here, is he relatively stable?
Yes.
Would that be a good indication that the medication that he's on is working?
Or else that he doesn't have a major mental illness.
He's on medication during...
Yes, he is on medicine. And he actually did fairly well going forward from about a month after his incarceration.
And he was put on Geodon the day that he arrived.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
I think this is what you're talking about. His alcohol and drug use history on page 25 in the second paragraph. I think you reported that he had been using marijuana about 2 weeks prior to killing his children.
He said he last used marijuana about 2 weeks before his last use was 2 weeks before his arrest.
And you know he didn't test positive for marijuana.
Right, he did not test positive. He had switched primarily to using synthetic cannabinoids or spice, specifically one called Scooby Snacks.
And that had been several months before, as opposed to 2 weeks before.
He'd been using spice all along. He'd been using spice and marijuana.
Okay, so you said that he said, I stopped when I found spice.
Well, he eventually cut down the marijuana use and was not using it anymore. For the past 2 weeks before the alleged crimes happened, he was not using marijuana. He said he was just using spice daily. He described the term, I'd wake and bake, meaning he would get up first thing in the morning and use spice.
But he didn't show up positive for marijuana on this topic.
He didn't show up positive for marijuana. He showed up positive for a synthetic cannabinoid called AB pinica.
I think move forward a little bit to page 27 at the top, where you talked about he had this relatively stable 8 years during his marriage or after he got out of boot camp where he was not using drugs or alcohol, right?
Correct. He was completely sober during his 8-year marriage to Amber. Not using marijuana, not drinking, not smoking cigarettes.
But,
No.
but he did tell you that he was still hearing voices.
Experiencing unwanted thoughts sometimes, yes. I think that Mr. Jones has had clear times where he's been depressed. I think that Ms. Haynes referred him to his family practitioner for medicine for depression and anxiety after the separation and divorce from Amber. That was a very difficult time for him.
And I think what you said was that these voices were not an impairment to him, right?
I mean, that's the only time they were impairing. And they're not voices, but his anxious thoughts when he was having trouble concentrating at work. That's impairment. Like, I can't think of anything else, but my wife's going to leave me. She's having an affair. And I'm thinking about it all the time at work, whether I want to or not. And I think it's starting to interfere with my ability to concentrate on what I'm supposed to be doing at Intel.
Even during his years of sobriety, he reported that the voices were distressing.
They didn't interfere with his functioning, his ability to go to school or work.
But they still bothered.
He experienced them, yes.
Finally, real quick, on the top of page 28, he also talked about having taken Chantix.
Yes.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen about that?
Chantix is a medicine called varenicline that's used to stop smoking. It's a nicotine receptor drug. It's supposed to help decrease the craving. People go on it when they want to quit smoking.
Now, did he say he was taking it as
No, he would frequently forget to take it.
okay. Was he taking it inconsistently?
Yes.
I believe next.
And he continued to smoke on top of it.
Is that not how you're supposed to?
Well, yes, but 2 packs on top of it.
It's supposed to naturally cut down on your craving. Is that how it works? It's supposed to work.
I believe so, yes.
And then you talked about his family history, right?
Yes.
And I think we already addressed a little bit about what was going on in the household in which he was raised, right? And I'm skipping forward to about page 30, the second paragraph there. He told you about the chaotic environment in which you grew up. You also got family history from other relatives.
Yeah, family history mainly. He describes his childhood as good. They did the best they could, but he always missed his mom.
Now, growing up in a childhood home where there's drug abuse, there's violence, mother who's no longer in the picture, and abandonment, those types of things. Do those things have an effect on people?
I'm sure they do. I mean, we are all affected by what we experience in childhood.
Okay. As a forensic psychiatrist, is childhood abandonment something that affects you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Mr. Jones was very sensitive to abandonment. He had been abandoned by his mother. And so when Amber left him, that's a bigger threat to him than someone who didn't have that childhood history.
You talked about how he did in school,
Yes.
on his educational adolescent history.
Yeah, he did excellent in school up until his senior year. Almost straight A student.
Well, he started getting in trouble around age 17, is that right?
Yes.
Now, and his grades dropped
Yeah, he was caught with marijuana at school. He started using marijuana and drinking much more heavily towards his senior year. He said, I want to go to the military. I just wanted to graduate and have fun and party with friends.
Now, and you also knew that he had been in a number of car wrecks, right?
Yes, 15, 16, and 18, I believe.
And the car wrecks preceded his drop in grades and behavioral. Is that right?
One of them did. Well, two of them did.
And those are the two where we talked about
He has a depressed skull fracture from the one at age 15.
and the one at 16 was in the same place where he got the scar, and that was where a scan was eventually done.
Yes.
Next, I think we've already talked about his military history, and then you talked about his adult functioning, education, his religious history, his marital and parental history. And I'm going to skip ahead to around page 36 at the top, starting at bottom page 35. See, this was after he and Amber had divorced, right? You with me on that?
They had separated on June 7th of 2012 legally.
Okay.
And although she admitted to adultery, they decided to divorce after a year of separation.
Okay.
Because she had found out that he was having an affair with a live-in babysitter.
And was there a period of time where she missed some visits?
Yes.
And what was his response to her missed visit?
He described that the place where Amber was living with her young boyfriend and his parents, that no one in the house was working, that he didn't know exactly how they supported themselves, and he thought that they might try to take advantage of Amber. She didn't have a job. She had no source of income. She didn't drive. And he was concerned that they would prostitute her.
And so what did he do?
He looked at Backpage.
He started looking for her on...
Yeah, to see if that's what was going on as an explanation for why she wouldn't show up for visitation.
So he was searching for her on the internet?
Yes.
On sites where people normally post for prostitutes?
Yes.
The second paragraph down, you talked about where DSS was called because of a bruise on the tongue. Is that right?
Yes.
And I know the jury's already heard it and they've seen the picture. You said that there was a bruise on his neck. Have you seen the picture of the bruise?
I believe I did.
And is it actually on his chin?
I'd have to see it again. I'm sorry, I've reviewed hundreds of thousands of documents, and I just...
The jury had the picture. You looked at information from the collateral sources, particularly you talked to Mr. Jones Sr., Tim Jones Sr.
I did.
And you talked to him about Tim's head injury.
Yes.
And you asked him about whether or not there was a change in his personality.
Right.
What did he tell you?
He did not notice a big change in his personality, but at the same time, Tim was entering late adolescence and doing teenage rebellious type things.
Well, I mean, as somebody who's been studious and going from a straight-A student to I don't care attitude, would that be considered a change in personality?
Not necessarily, especially if he's using drugs and wants to party because he's going to go into the military. He doesn't need to work, keep up the grades to go to college.
you also talked to his grandmother, Roberta Thornsburg.
Yes.
And how did she tell you he looked or appeared? She had seen him in Atlanta a couple weeks prior to.
She thought she saw him in Atlanta the weekend before this happened.
Was that correct?
And I just said, based on my records and looking at the credit cards, when the Embassy Suite text messages about this is where we're going to stay, it was earlier in August. It was the first weekend in August.
Before the kids started.
Right. And she was very concerned. He'd lost weight, lost a lot of weight. He was drinking excessively. You get, I think, coupons or something to go to the bar. When you check into Embassy Suites, he asked for her coupons and her husband's coupon. That he was drinking heavily and looked haggard.
Did she mention to you that he had come in and thought that Elaine had been behind the couch crying?
Yes, she did.
And that made it into your report.
I don't know if that made it into my report or not. I don't think so.
Well, she told you that was false, right?
He actually told me it was Gabriel.
That he thought was behind the couch. And there was no child behind the couch, right?
Apparently not, no.
I mean, from what Mrs. Thornsberry told you.
Not that she was aware. She was asleep.
And I think we've sort of talked about this, and I'm skipping forward to the results of, I think it's under the results of the Neuropsychological Evaluation. And we've talked about that his voices or auditory disturbance may best be explained as negative self-talk. That's your conclusion, right?
No, that was Dr. Cruz's conclusion.
Okay. Do you agree with that?
I think that what he reports is voices or anxious thoughts that he has. I mean, just like anybody would have in certain situations.
Well, it says that they're not his thoughts, right? When he talks
They're thoughts that he doesn't want, they're intrusive and that he doesn't want to think about this all the time, but he can't stop.
and they resolved through medication, is that right? That's what he reported.
Right, but I would expect them to because of the SSRI that he's taking, the antidepressant.
Okay. The voice in your head, your conscience, your negative self-talk, you can't resolve that through medication, right? That doesn't go away.
If it's due to anxiety, yes, it can go away with treatment with an antidepressant medication.
Is this, let's see, in the diagnostic formulation, is that part of your report or is that part of Dr. Cruz's?
That's my report.
Okay. You talked about his mood swings, right?
Right.
Can you tell the jury about his mood swings?
Yes.
Bottom of that first paragraph.
He reported that sometimes he had 1 minute he'll feel really euphoric good, and then something can happen and he'll immediately get in a bad mood.
Okay. Now,
That he has rapid mood swings, 1 minute happy, 1 minute sad. And that type of description of mood swings is not consistent with bipolar disorder or mania.
okay. Did you say it was more consistent with a personality disorder?
Yes.
Now, you know that he has organic brain damage, right?
I know that he had a depressed skull fracture. I know that initially the CAT scans revealed no brain contusion. I know that you have experts that say there is evidence that there was a brain contusion. I know that there's a structural, I mean, you could look at the scans, it's quite obvious. functionally, in other words, his performance on the neuropsych testing, his concentration, his memory. The reason I got the neuropsych testing is I had a defense-provided report that says he has an IQ of 87. And I'm sitting there to myself, how does someone with an IQ of 87 get a computer science degree from Mississippi State, summa cum laude, which is the highest grades you can get? That and someone with an IQ of 87 don't match. It'd be very hard for someone with an IQ of 87 to do that well in such a hard college degree program. So that's why I wanted the neuropsych.
Right. The frontal lobe is the part that controls executive functioning and emotions. Right?
Yes.
Now, impairments to that can cause personality changes, right?
It can, yes. Frontal lobe damage can cause personality changes.
And it can cause difficulty with mood regulation.
Yes. But I would have expected that to be quite evident right after the injury. And I didn't get that history from his father or his grandmother.
And the jury's heard from Dr. Snyder about how long and what effects people can have, right?
Oh no,
You've reviewed
a report.
Snyder's and Dr. Bigler's reports with regard to brain injury.
Yes.
You don't have any reason to disagree with any of their findings?
I have reason to disagree with, I don't have the reports in front of me, but about his functioning. His memory, concentration, frontal lobe functioning on neuropsych testing is excellent.
And you're talking about his cognitive test, his IQ.
It's not just IQ, but just ability to plan, to abstract, you know. Dr. Cruz specifically gave him tests that are designed to measure frontal lobe functioning. And they were all fine.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If I can ask for clarification of his questions. Dr. Frierson read the reports. He was not here for testimony, so I don't want their confusion about maybe something that was testified to that's not in the report. So
That's fair
if
enough.
it's something specific, I'd ask that be clarified.
Fair suggestion, so let's don't misconstrue any product and none that you have. Be clear with your questions, since he's not been sitting here during any of the trial.
And they haven't made any specific findings about Mr. Jones. They've just made findings about possible impairments from brain injury, right?
Yeah, yes.
And you don't have any reason to disagree with what they say about possible impairments.
Yeah, I've seen the pictures.
I think you described them as very impressive.
They are impressive.
What is that?
You can see structural abnormalities in the brain. But I'm concerned with functional, not structural. You can have a very normal-looking brain and have horrible functioning. You can have a very abnormal-looking brain and still be functioning very well.
And he was. I mean, he went to college, got a degree, graduated, got a job.
Right.
Right.
There was no evidence of impairment.
Over on the top of page 43, I think you were talking about some of the possible symptoms of schizophrenia. And at the bottom of the first paragraph, you're talking about disorganized speech or behavior. Is that right?
It's in my report. I mentioned it.
And can you tell the ladies and gentlemen about disorganized speech and behavior as it relates to schizophrenia?
Right. People with schizophrenia at times when they're not in treatment can display disorganized speech and behavior. You might see bizarre things that people do. You might see someone dressed in 3 coats when it's 100 degrees outside. You might see someone speak and it really not make any sense. They jump from topic to topic. They may make up words that mean something to them that you've never heard of. Made up words that they have their meaning for them. So, one of the things that I looked at is the description of Mr. Jones 24 hours after he was arrested, when he's sweating profusely, foaming at the mouth, screaming 1 minute, not making a lot of sense. His father said it was just like I was staring at his mother when she was mentally ill. He has all those things, and then, which, could be a presentation of acute psychotic episode of schizophrenia. But then without any sort of treatment, 24 hours later, he's back to pretty much his normal self. His dad said, I saw my Tim again. If this was schizophrenia or a psychotic disorder due to schizophrenia, I would not expect it to get better without treatment. It doesn't get better on its own.
How about the driving all over the southeast?
He was, that was purposeful on his part. He was trying not to be at home. He was trying to figure out what to do. Where to go, where to dispose of the bodies.
And did you review the notes that he had made about the body disposal?
Yes.
Did those appear to be disorganized?
No.
Not at all. All the arrows, all the circles.
Well, people have ways of making notes to themselves. They were logical in sequence. Dissolve the bodies, saw them up, burn them, dispose of them. He had looked at places to dispose of the bodies. He had searched cadaver dogs in landfills.
Which you didn't take them to?
No.
Can you tell the jury a little bit about delusions and how they develop? And
Delusions are fixed false beliefs. They are something that someone will believe even when given evidence to the contrary. I'll give you an example. I had a guy who thought the government had implanted a computer chip in his body. It was monitoring him and sending him all sorts of messages. And actually, his physician sent him for a scan, an MRI scan. Said, there's nothing in your body. You haven't been implanted. And then, he says it's got a cloaking device. So even when given evidence that this isn't in your body, he still believes it. That's a fixed, false belief. Delusions develop very slowly over time. You might have the neighbor next door is parking his car closer and closer to your property, and you become suspicious of that. One day you see him out by the mailbox and you think he might be looking in your mailbox. You become suspicious of that. A few days later, you may smell some abnormal smell inside your house, and you think the neighbor might be putting something in your air conditioning vent to poison you. And then at some point, you become convinced that your neighbor's trying to hurt you. But it begins gradually and over time to reach a delusion.
okay. And you reviewed some internet searches regarding Mira and whether or not Tim thought she might be schizophrenic?
Yes, he said that one day Mira was talking to herself.
And you started looking at
Yes, he was very afraid that he was going to have what his mother had and that his children were going to have what his mother had. Schizophrenia.
You didn't think that was a delusion?
No. I think a lot of people that have mental illness in the family worry that it might affect them. The risk is greater if you have a parent, but it's not. 85 to 90% of people with a parent with schizophrenia will not get schizophrenia. The vast majority do not end up with schizophrenia.
The time trying to electrocute me, you did not think that was it.
I thought it was a paranoid thought, but it wasn't of delusional intensity. It wasn't fixed at that point because he didn't think anything about Natan earlier that day. I mean, he knew that Natan was fascinated with electricity.
And you had done searches about
Right. Could he hurt himself? He'd unscrewed a light bulb above the bathroom sink. He caught him one day about 2 weeks, I think, before this happened. And he was making sure that he wanted to see how dangerous it was. But he said Natan had a fascination with electricity.
You don't think that was the beginning? I mean,
I think he was getting well, you know, that turns into, on the night that this happened, the sudden thought he's not confessing to blowing the thing. He'd been using spice all day, and then he thinks, you know, maybe he's out to harm me.
that was a paranoid thought versus it hadn't gotten to the point of a fix, possibly.
Correct.
And the Amber being prostituted, that wasn't the fix, possibly.
The way he describes that, it sounds like it could be in reality based. I mean, there's nothing in the way his description of that makes me think it's delusional.
Young, it's a good time to interrupt for a break.
Yes.
Still got some more to do?
Yes.
Okay. I'm in need of one, so Frierson, stay right there. Y'all take a short break. Have you back out here shortly. Don't discuss the case.